How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I know I got so many messages from from the last one we did. Just tons of
Oh,
people
great.
messaging me. Yeah, they were loving it, man.
Good.
Yeah. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah, no, it's been good. I went away for Christmas, spent a month in the Philippines with my son
Oh wow.
and his family. So we did that. And then I came back and then was out in Prague working because I'm kind of gone back to work, really. So,
Oh class. So you're going back into the old studios again.
yeah,
I was wondering what that picture on your Facebook was. It was like, was that a new picture at all? You had a kind of
yeah.
desk, this class mixing desk.
Yeah, fantastic desk. It's Studio Sono out in near Prague.
Oh, right.
Fantastic place. I've been going there for about 25 years.
Oh, cool. So who are you
Um,
recording out there?
I was mixing an album for this woman from Belgium called Chantal Actor. I've done maybe 3 or 4 records with her over the years. Um,
Class.
Chris Ekman from the Walkabouts and I did an album with her um, probably about 6 years ago, and then I've done a couple with her since. Um,
Oh.
and then in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going out to Bratislava to mix something, and then I'm mixing "Held by Trees." You remember that
Oh
disco? Yeah,
yeah. I
they
had him
done.
on I had him on the podcast actually.
Yeah, they did a live recording at Real World, Gabriel's place.
Class.
So we're going to mix that. So yeah, I'm back in the fray after kind of 3 years break. It's good.
Are you happy to be back, yeah?
Yeah, I feel quite kind of refreshed, and it's kind of fun being back in the studio. So, I mean, I'm not working for record companies. I'm just working direct with artists. I won't put myself through all that. But
Yeah, the bullshit of those fuckers.
yeah, it's
Jesus
just not
Christ.
worth it.
I know, because you can never know. You never get a straight answer. It's like, are they telling me the truth or are they? It's all like this schmoozing shite, like so.
It is, and they're always so enthusiastic to kind of get you to do the job, but then trying to get paid and dealing with it later, it's just like, can't be bothered. I mean, I gave up on Universal some time ago because, yeah, it's impossible. And when
Yeah,
you phone up, you kind of get an answer machine, you can't even get through to talk to somebody. So I just thought, after struggling through 2018, 2019, trying to get stuff sorted, I just went, I'm out of it. But then I got asked to do some really kind of cool things. So it was like, why not, really?
do you think they're like? Do you think the people who work in the companies are a lot different mentality wise than back with say the 70s, 60s,
Yeah, I
70s?
mean, I think record companies always been slightly corrupt, if you know what I mean. But you could, I mean, I was spoiled at Ireland because I could literally walk in to Ireland and speak to somebody, or even get to see Chris Blackwell. It was just so
Oh
easy.
yeah.
And then it was changed. That really started to change in the 80s when kind of lawyers and that took over, and it all became like a business. Um,
Mm.
in the 70s, it was still quite a little industry in some ways, and very innocent.
Yeah, yeah. That's always the issue, isn't it? Once like
Yeah.
it's just, but they're so greedy, man. It's like even vinyl records. Like they're people started buying them again. They're like, okay, let's hike the price up, and you're like, they're gonna stop buying them, you idiots. Like
And
they never
also,
care.
yeah, I mean, it's what was I going to say? It's oh yeah, all the way through the 90s, early 2000s, if there was a remastering job, I mean, this is mainly to do with Talk Talk, I suppose, but if there was
Mm.
a remastering job, they'd get me to go in and do it. So
Mm.
I'd go in with Dennis Blackham and we'd remaster things. And over the last 6 or 8 years, everything that's been released has had nothing to do with any of the band. Tim Screen isn't
Oh,
involved. I'm not involved. Obviously, Mark's dead. And they just get some office boy, I think, who's like 25 and give him the responsibility of doing it. So there's been some
oh,
really bad pressings and bad mastering, especially on vinyl. It's hard to mess up a
oh.
CD, but some people still want to add top and compress it. So it's a different. It's just such a you feel upset rather than angry because you do all that work on something, and then you get something through and you just go, what is this? Why did they do this? But none of us have been asked to do anything for like 20 years.
No
All the
way.
all the remastering has been really in the hands of Talk Talk's management and the record companies. So
Wow.
quite bizarre, but that's
That
another sign of the times, really.
that is bizarre. Do you think those records work on vinyl? Because they're so like quiet.
Yeah, I don't think Mark's solo album works particularly well on vinyl unless it's a fantastically good pressing. They had a lot of problems with the pressings, side two, I think it was, which was had a kind of noise running through it. So
Yeah,
and Mark talked about that in one of his last interviews. Um, he was saying that in a way the CD is better because if you listen to it on tape, you've got more background noise. Unless it's a good pressing, you've got noise. You know, I
yeah,
think Spirit of Eden probably works all right on vinyl, but you know, if you get a good mastered CD which isn't hyped, they sound great. You know,
yeah,
and I finally adjusted to see. You know, I mean, now CDs are old fashioned, aren't they? You know what I mean? Now people are listening on MP3s or streaming or stuff. So, but you get a good CD, then that's possibly the best way. That certainly Mark's solo album because it's so quiet.
yeah, yeah. I've like two copies of his record on vinyl, and one of them's okay, but the other one is like absolute dog shit.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds horrendous.
I know, which
That
is
was a,
sad. You know.
yeah, I like because it's such beautiful music. You kind of you don't want to interrupt in your flow of it. And you're
Yeah,
like,
you don't
oh,
want to have something.
yeah, you're just thinking. You're like, dude, what's that? That's the kind of weird thing with music, isn't it? Where it's different with film is film seems to be going more and like people want to watch things in the highest quality they can, like but people don't realize that like Spotify and shit, they're listening to kind of the lowest. We're kind of going down and down
Yeah,
and down,
yeah.
which is so bizarre. Like,
It's convenience, isn't it? You know, because
yeah,
people listen off their phone or whatever it is. You know, but there was an article. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but some American guy wrote an article in the early '90s explaining. I mean, he thinks that kind of no 1957 was the peak of like quality.
right.
And then he goes through this whole thing, and it's even in my experience, I've seen, you know, 4 track on half inch, 8 track 1 inch, 16 on 2 inch. It was all the same ratio. And
Yeah.
then we took a drop in sound to go 24 on 2 inch. So it didn't sound as
Oh,
good, but you had eight extra tracks. And then all the way since then, with the early digital and then with the early Pro Tools, which was pretty rough, we've taken a loss in quality in order to have all the facilities. And I think that's still going on. You know, people want to listen on their phone or whatever, so they're willing to accept a lesser quality of sound because it's convenient. And I'm beginning
yeah,
to wonder whether people actually listen the way I listen. You know what I mean? It's like, what are they listening to? Because as you
yeah,
say, a lot of the streaming, a lot of the MP3s, I mean, they've improved, but it's still not has no depth to it. You know?
yeah. It's like 2D. There's something kind of
Yeah.
weirdly. I mean, it's passable. Like you can kind
Oh
of
yeah.
listen to it,
Yeah.
but it's just I know what you mean. It has that kind of weird thing, especially when you listen to like those, especially those Blue Note records that are getting redone on vinyl. Like they just sound incredible,
Yeah.
and amazing shit. Like,
And there was this all goes back even in the late '70s when into the '80s when they wanted to bring out CDs,
mm,
they started using recycled vinyl because then the pressings weren't very good, and they could say, "Hey, listen to this vinyl, but listen to the new CD." And I worked a lot with bands like Roxy Music. We used to pay. It cost 50p an album more back then in the kind of early '80s, but we used to get like Deutsche Grammophon Virgin vinyl and get it
right.
pressed onto that. And then you got great pressings that sounded great,
Oh
but you
wow,
had to pay that bit extra for it because I'm sure it was a ploy by the record companies to, they really wanted to bring out CDs. So
mm,
they made the vinyl sound poor. Because I've heard records from the '60s that sound better than records from the '80s. It's just bizarre.
yeah. Anything they could do for an old quick buck, you know the way it is. So I'm about to say to you about the re-release of the AV1
Yeah.
project. How did that come about?
Well, it was. I guess it started. This recent thing started last autumn. We got
Mm.
Dave and I got approached by um, Bada Bing. It's an American label that
Yeah, I know
pressed
them.
up some talk stuff, and they approached us and said they'd like to put out AV1 on a vinyl, which I mean it was great, but also it's tricky because the album, it's a long CD,
Mm.
so it makes it difficult to put it onto vinyl.
Yeah,
But you have to kind of change the running order to make it really work, but you still get sides that are like 26 minutes, so it's not ideal. So he was the first to kind of inquire, and then I explained that, well, you know, because for Dave and I, that album kind of got hijacked by Talk Talk's management. Once Mark was involved, because Mark was involved, suddenly
Okay.
they kind of took over the project in a way. So I said, well, you know, if you want to use the piano track, you're going to have to get in touch with Keith, because, you know, I don't want to, I don't think you can use it without getting permission, you know.
Yeah.
So although I'd paid for the original album and it was technically Dave and my album, yeah, I say it got hijacked. So that's kind of where it started. And then I was in the, you know, the Philippines, and then came back from there, and I was just thinking, why don't we just put this out without the piano track? But why don't we just put this out ourselves on, you know, Bandcamp, just so it's out there? And Dave was really up for it and did some fantastic kind of visuals, which gave the flavor of what we were doing in '97 when Mark kind of saw and heard stuff and offered to play.
Hmm.
So that's kind of, you know, and then we set up this Bandcamp thing. Dave did some great visuals, and it launched yesterday. So it's now on Bandcamp. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to get it out there. And also I'd seen on a lot of sites people talking about the record and the fact that you couldn't get hold of it or blah, 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 you know. So, I thought, well, why not? You know, so we've put it out without the piano track. And I'm sure some, you know, a lot of the Talk Talk fans will be pissed off about that. But I just can't go through, you know, basically Dave and I want to reclaim the album, which was ours,
Right.
and get it out there. And if Keith eventually comes through, because I don't think Ben Bada Bing has been able to really get a reply from him in 5 months. But if he does come back and say yes, then we'll include it, because Dave's got some visual ideas for it.
Yeah.
And it will be added. But at the moment, it's just the original 3 tracks that we did for these installations.
So how did it work? Were you writing on it, or were you producing and
Well, I
engineering
produced it,
it?
but I mean, Dave and I made the record ourselves. Back in the mid '90s, Mark found this kind of 4-track digital machine that ran with what are they? Mini discs. You know those?
Oh, I had them.
Right. Well,
They were quality.
We had you got these kind of deluxe mini discs that ran kind of longer, high quality things, and the machine was a 4-track machine, but you could mix 4 tracks down to 2 tracks. It had the playback head kind of and record before the erase head. It was a
Cool.
really weird setup. So you could record 4 tracks and then, in a way, bounce it to itself. You only had the one chance, and then you had that mix, and then you could kind of overdub more. So Mark and I both bought one of these machines, because Mark was using it at his house for just messing around demos and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Along with he got a Logic system together eventually, but this was kind of before that had happened. So that's really what I used. Dave and I knew Dave from a band that I produced way back in the maybe 1990 called the Shy Reptiles. So we just started, you know, recording atmospherics and things to go with all this visual stuff that he was doing. We got Mark Feltham to play on it, and various kind of friends and people. But we basically just sat in, you know, my house and Dave's house and, you know, various locations with our little 4-track machine, and, you know, gongs and brushed piano and a lot of the things that I'd learned through the Talk stuff, really, that approach of just getting textures and sounds, but not from necessarily an obvious instrument. And we built up these tracks. I think part 1's about 90 minutes long. Part 2 is about 10 minutes long. And they all fitted with these installations that we then went off to do. The first one we did was in a kind of a derelict factory out in Darlington, which we took over, and we had these 4-track machines with delays, a 40-minute delay. So when you walked around this kind of huge, great space with all these visuals, the track would be going as you came in, but then when you got to a certain location, in a way, it would all start again
Ah,
because of
cool.
these delays that we had. And we had lots of different speakers scattered about. And it was fun to do. I mean, we never charged people to go in and see it, and it cost us money to do them all.
Yeah.
But we ended up doing the Edinburgh Festival. That was the last thing we did in about 2000. And then we both kind of went, well, you know, this is costing us money. And by then, our album had been, I say, kind of taken over. So we kind of knocked it on the head and never did anymore. But we've just been asked, since this has kind of come out, we've been asked to do an installation down in Monkton Wild, down in Dorset.
Oh,
Somebody that
cool.
I know down there. There's a beautiful little church. So we might do that. Also, kind of galleries and things that you could take over, because a lot of it can be projected now.
Yeah,
It's different
yeah.
to how 25 years ago we had projections and things, but it was on, Dave would hang up kind of multiple layers of muslin screens,
Ah,
and then you'd fire this through it. So you could actually walk around the installation, you know, you were part of the installation, as it were. So things would be different probably now because it's 25 years later and we've got a lot more access to the way we do it.
yeah. You can
But
like it's so easy to like trigger. You can trigger things and everything and do
yeah,
crazy stuff. So
yeah,
it's that's what's cool kind of about the technology. It's caught up with kind of it's kind of caught up with some ideas you probably had to do stuff
yeah,
because back then,
definitely.
especially tape and all that stuff. Like
Yeah,
for all the downsides of digital, just like because I've seen people doing some crazy stuff with trigger and stuff. Like
yeah,
Imogen Heap has this. I've ever seen she's got this kind of glow, like it's a MIDI controller with her hands, and she can
oh, yeah,
control by going like this,
yeah.
doing different noises. Quite incredible.
But
Like
it was Laura Anderson. If I don't know if you know that she's
no,
no, well, she's an American. She had a single out in the '80s called "Oh Superman," which is about an 8-minute single, if you like. But I saw her in London at the ICU, I think it was, Arts Place in London, and she put on. It was called America, and it was basically in four nights, and each night it was a 2 or 3 hour thing, and then next
oh,
night was part two, and I went and saw that, and she was remarkable. I mean, she had all kinds. She had a violin bow, a violin where she'd taken off the strings, and she'd put a tape recorder playback head on the violin,
yeah,
and on the bow, instead of it being the gut hairs and stuff, horsehair, it was a piece of tape, 1/4 inch tape with something on it written, said on it. So when she drew the bow across the playback head, so I think it was, I mean, I can't remember exactly what it said now, but it was something along the lines of, you are what you are, or you do what you do. And so she could pick out certain bits of this and go backwards and stuff. So that was one of the
cool.
things, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And she had this suit that she wore that had all these triggers in it. And she would
Oh
just
yeah.
beat herself out the body, and it would trigger all these different drum sounds and parts. I mean, she was way ahead of so many people. And
Wow.
that was about 85.
85.
Yeah.
What man?
And she had a microphone, she had a light that she managed to have in her mouth. So it's all dark. And when she sang the Oh Superman, which was the kind of, in a way, the only hit or the only thing that people might remember her from, her mouth, would be a light. You just, all you'd see is this moving mouth of
Wow.
light. I mean,
That's
how she
cool.
did it, I have no idea. But
Wow.
somehow she got a small light in her mouth and could still sing. But she was remarkable, man. I mean, really arty, and
Yeah.
and also back in a lot of projections. It was very, although it was called For America, it was very much an anti-American thing in a way. It was all about the kind of weapons, and there was it was the era of Green
Make it, was
Comet
it? Okay, right.
with those rockets and missiles and things that we were storing here for the Americans. So she had all these missiles taking off and all this kind of stuff. I mean, they were brilliant shows, but that's all she did. She did those 4 nights, and then never saw her do anything like that here again.
Oh,
She was, I think she was teamed up with Lou Reed. I think they were partners. So
oh.
she was living with him, and she's still in New York in a kind of loft. But she's a phenomenal artist.
No, I must check her out. I never heard of her.
Yeah,
Does
yeah,
she still
Laurie
like?
Anderson.
Does she still put out music?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
In fact, the girl, this Chantal actor that I was mixing, her her boyfriend is a kind of jazz drummer, and he'd just been working with her because it's like a small world at times. Because I happened to mention Laura Anderson because of something, and she said, "Oh, my man's just been working with her. She's phenomenal."
Oh, that's class.
And they
Wow.
went to New York to do some recording, and then they were hanging out with her there. So she's definitely still around and making music, and all the probably visuals as well.
It's mad that that's in the 80s and she was triggering stuff
Mm.
like that. That must have been complex
Yeah,
as hell. Like, you could just
yeah.
imagine the setup, like,
And
because
she had lots of little tricks, but one of them was she's kind of on stage, and there's a light on her. So behind her is away her shadow. So
right.
she's doing things in her arm, and it's moving behind her as well because
Yeah.
it's like a shadow. And then somehow the shadow would freeze. So she's still moving, but the shadow's suddenly not. And then suddenly the shadow does move, and it was all delayed projections and all kinds of things. But I mean, it's a pity that I don't think it's on any kind of recorded film, but it would be brilliant to see it again because it was just out there. And
Oh,
it
well,
is, it's like nearly 40 years ago.
geez, don't remind me. I'm getting old, hey. Are you and Dave gonna do any more music? Or are you gonna
It's quite possible. I mean, we'll probably see how this goes. I mean, he when we were doing this, it was like 96, 97 when we were recording and doing the original, and then we did 3 years of these installations. But he went on to become a proper, went to university and became a proper artist, if you like. So his work is just incredible what he does. From He works in all kinds of different formats. So some of it I've got a painting of his that is absolutely stunning, but he works with a lot of projections and a lot of, he'll go out and do these long time exposures on the moors of something.
Oh,
So it
cool.
takes maybe 2 hours for something to happen, but then he can take that and treat that, and you come up with some other kind of world. So he's been doing that for the last 20 odd years. And musically, he's been doing a few things because he sent me something a little while back, um, which is a fantastic piece of music. He works with like dance troupes as well, so
Okay.
he's in a very mixed media setup. So it's quite possible that we would. I mean, it would be great to get back with him and do something, but right now, I guess financially things are tighter. This country's going through a pretty
Yeah.
tough time in a way. So I don't have the ready cash to kind of go, hey, let's go and do this, because I know
Yeah.
it's expensive to do most of these things. And I got rid of most of my gear, so I don't have my Revox anymore, and I don't
Oh.
have this 4-track anymore. I've still got a few mics, but we'd have to find. I guess we'd use a Pro Tools rig.
Oh God, the dreaded.
Join the other world.
Would you ever get into like not well just the DAW world? I know it's very kind of anti like digital world. Would you ever get into like Pro Tools or
Well, I did
any
have
of it?
Pro Tools. I had two different Pro Tools sets, which I lost both because I updated my computer the first time to the new format. They came update your computer, and
Yeah.
then it wouldn't play my old Pro Tools 5 or whatever it was. So I then paid out the money and got, I think it was Pro Tools at 7 or 8, and then I foolishly a few years later the same thing happened to me, and now you don't really buy Pro Tools, do you? You kind of rent it now.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into all of that. I do have Logic, which I don't really like kind of working with. I'm much more au fait with Pro Tools. But I've
Yeah.
had to adapt and get into that because everything I do, whether it's recorded on tape beforehand, but it always ends up in Pro Tools
Yeah.
or
That's the thing,
Logic,
isn't
but
it?
hopefully Pro Tools. And I mix in studios, it's mainly Pro Tools. I mean, the Chantel thing, we mixed it from Pro Tools back into Pro Tools, but then I'd sent it through a 1/2 inch tape machine. And the mixes just sound, as soon as it came back from the tape, it just sounded so good. I mean, it just suddenly got depth and sounded like a record, rather than just another Pro
Yeah.
Tools.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love tape and I love analog, but I've had to adapt to the modern world.
Yeah. Pro Tools is shit, man. I've been using it since it is shit. I've been using it for so long, and like, you could be just doing something and it freezes, and you're like, dude. Like after this record that I'm doing, I'm switching over to there's a thing called Studio One PreSonus. That shit's great. Like there's so much stuff you can do on that with set. Like Pro Tools just does my head in. It's like the leader in that world, but it's
Yeah.
kind of shit. Like
But it was kind of designed by technicians. It's not been designed by engineers.
no.
I was working with a guy called Phill who was making albums very much in the same approach as kind of Talk Talk, very spontaneous and just create, everyone just trying things out and then editing and keeping stuff. We'd start off with tracks that were maybe 30 minutes long. And then
Yeah.
over the process, they'd be edited down. It might end up being a 10-minute piece or something.
Right.
And I think he was using Digital Performer or something like that, but it was so good. It never crashed. You could record at really high res, and it just seemed easy,
Yeah.
because Pro Tools, I mean, I know it's easy, but it's not user friendly if you're an engineer.
No, it's like the thing like I started using it when I was 19 and I got just so like, it's like the thing you kind of go
Yeah.
to and I'm like no, I need to get off this shit because so many times it just crashes or just you get so frustrated by it so further.
And
And
the
plus
one
like
thing that's always bugged me is that, and it's very much the analog digital, but in the past, say you were sitting in the control room and you hear a musician playing something which you just think is brilliant, you could arm a track. So you're playing the tape machine and
yeah,
he's playing along, but you're not actually recording. And then you hear something
right.
like shit. You can arm a track,
Yeah.
go into record instantly and capture it. On Pro Tools, you still cannot do that. After 20 years, you still cannot arm it once it's playing.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, you
have
have to
to
stop
stop
it.
it, and
Yeah.
then right as soon as you stop it, he obviously stops, and then you arm it everything and go, no, carry on with what you were doing. And the guy might say, no, what was I doing? It's just like, well, goes, I don't know, mate. You know what I mean? So you've lost that moment, and
Yeah.
it's the one thing that's bugged me. I mean, ever since 2002 or something, it's bugged me that you cannot arm a track and record. You have to stop everything and assign things, and it's all just so unhelpful and unfriendly.
Yeah. It's
I
just
guess when the HD system came out in like 2004, whenever that was, at least it started to sound quite good.
yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but earlier stuff was pretty grim, I thought. That's why when people kept saying, "Oh, we've got Pro," it's like, yeah, but I've got a tape machine here. Let's use the tape machine and only use Pro Tools for the things we really need to, like editing or repairing or something. But let's get it onto tape first.
Yeah.
And Rollo, initially in the 90s, when I worked with Rollo, with Dido and Faithers and that, we would have a tape machine and lots of things like Jupiters and things running live in the control room off MIDI, and a little 1040 computer. It was really basic with Cubase, and it was so much fun and such a quick vibe. And then about 99, 2000, he went into Logic. And once we're in Logic, we lost the tape machine because he found it too much of a hassle to sync it up.
Okay.
We lost the outboard Jupiters running live because, like, once he recorded something, well, we'll put it into Logic, and then it was always there, so it never got tweaked. Whereas
Yeah.
before, we'd have three of these things running, and Sister Bliss would like come and tweak a few sounds or change a little bit. But once it was in Logic, it was like God. It was like it's in Logic. That's the final thing.
Yeah.
So I think we lost a huge amount of spontaneity by just that period of going Cubase tape to Logic. It suddenly changed the whole way that we all worked.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. They're kind of weirdly uncreative, a lot of those DAWs, because it's like, oh, I have an idea. Hold on now, I'll put my computer on and then I'll
Yeah, I've
say
just
this.
got to assign this. Oh, hang on a minute. It doesn't, and then you go into the inputs and outputs, and it's like, well, I don't know what's happening. And it's just like, yeah, it takes 10 minutes or something when really it should take 30 seconds.
Yeah. What do you think? Because I've never used tape, so I don't really know. But what do you I know there's harmonic distortion it's adding and all these different things. What do you think it's adding that
Well, the main thing it
Pro
adds
Tools?
is it's three-dimensional in a way. It gives you depth.
Yeah.
So you don't have this thing that's kind of here, which all digital always is in a way.
Everything's
It,
up front and digital kind of, isn't
yeah,
it?
with tape, I mean, Timothy Screen, we had lots of discussions about this in the past. We don't believe you can record percussion digitally. properly because the
Right.
transient is so fast.
Oh yeah.
Um, the digital kind of accepts it all. So a tambourine always sounds like it's here, and it doesn't matter how quiet you put it, it still stays here. It just gets quieter. With tape, as soon as you record it to tape, those transients all get smoothed out, and it actually becomes it's sitting back there. You know, it sounds like it's in a room now instead of in your face. So there are
Right.
certain things that are just so much better off tape. And drums, that was the big thing with Rollo. Once we got rid of the tape, I never was happy with drum sounds because drum sounds on tape are just fantastic. And you can push tape if you want to. You know, that whole Led Zeppelin stuff. We used to have a tape in the 70s. I think it was called LR. It was either LR56 or LGR30, but it was a yellow back tape and it was very thick tape as well. And you could line up to 0 or +4, +7. We used to line it up to +7 above Ampex standard level, and then push that another 3 dB. So you're putting on 10 dB above the normal level, and the
Right.
tape would never distort. It just kept compressing and adding this harmonics and just tape sound. So the drums on Zeppelin songs, the reason why it all sounds the way it does is because it's tape being really pushed level wise, and it just keeps, you know, compressing and saturation. It
Yeah.
doesn't distort, you know.
Uh-huh. So it's kind
So
of
I love
gluing
tape.
everything together, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, that's like this Chantal actor when the mixes, which, you know, obviously you mix as good as you can get it kind of thing, but once it
Mm.
came back from tape, it suddenly just felt like a record. It was just like everything got glued together. It wasn't all these individual things. It was just like, wow, that is fantastic. And it was an old Studer A80, you know, half inch at 15 IPS, because I like 15 IPS because of the bass end. At different speeds you get different effects. So 15 IPS is great for bass end, 30 IPS is great for top end. So if you want
Uh-huh.
something really kind of crisp and clean, you used to use a Studer at 30. But if you wanted rock and roll or the, you know, Bob Marley and the Wailers and stuff, we'd always do it at 15. And here's another thing, you know, with Bob Marley and the Wailers, we had a 24 track and a 16. All the Bob Marley stuff I did, the Burning album, live at the Lyceum, it was done on a 16 track because the 16 track sounded so much better than the 24 track, and we could get away with 16 tracks. So
Yeah.
it was one. It's I mean, analog. It's a very user friendly format. You know, you can not push the level on tape and get something that's very clean and calm, especially if you're doing classical music. You know,
Uh-huh.
if you're doing rock, you can really push it and get the tape to work for you, and it changes the sound, but in a fantastically good way. You know.
Uh. So that
Because
new
I mean, with
record that you
digital, you're either the level's either right or you're clipped. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what level you put on; it all stays pretty much the same. With tape, it really changes.
Yeah. That new record that you did, when you were sending that to tape, were you just sending the actual mix to tape or were you sending individual parts?
No, it just. I mean, we could had we didn't have a huge amount of time. I mean, I could have put individually all the tracks through and then mixed it like that.
Yeah.
But obviously, you know, I didn't want to use Dolby, so you possibly would get a little bit more of a noise build up. But no, it was the final mix and then put to tape and brought back in. So you've on the Pro Tools rig, when they took it away, you've got the 10 tracks as digital mixes and then 10 tracks with the tape copy, if you like. But the tape copy just sounded so good.
That's
And
mad,
everyone
isn't
that
it?
was involved with it, because it was recorded in America, but the feedback immediately that came back from hearing the tape was saying, "This sounds beautiful. What did you do?" You know, but really, I didn't do a huge amount to their sounds. It was all recorded live in a room, so it had a vibe to it anyway. It was just that thing of mixing it and getting it to have space and air, and then putting it to tape, and it was just like sounds fantastic. No, I'm a
Uh,
massive fan of tape, even now.
so when you're mixing on the board as well, are you using the board EQ or are you using outboard EQ or how does that
No,
work?
I never use. I don't use. I mean, if I have used like inboard Pro Tools, if I need something that I can only get a certain way, because obviously you can be very precise when you're in a digital plug-in.
Yeah.
But no, I used it was a Neve, beautiful Neve 5088
Oh
desk.
wow.
So you've got lovely EQ, and they've got outboard gear, compressors and things. So all the stuff I used was either the desk or outboard gear. We didn't use anything as a plug-in as such.
Okay. Yeah, that's
And it
probably
makes a difference. It really does. It gives you this kind of depth, and it glues things more because, I love 1176 compressors, but if you use a real one, it sounds totally different to the plug-in. I mean, the plug-in looks like 1176, but it doesn't sound like an 1176.
no, no,
So
no.
it's what you're after. If you're after just a bit of compression, then it's a good plug-in to use. But if you want it to actually sound like a 60s or 70s 1176, you've got to use the real thing.
Yeah, I got two of those. I got two 1176 clones, like hardware,
Yeah,
and I got one of the LA2A clones
yeah,
as
they're
well.
good.
And they just sound, you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it's night and day. Because you're like, when you put on the compressor, like, it's all right. And you put on that, like, holy shit, man. Like, it just has a
Yeah.
sound. They
It
have
has
just
a
have
sound.
sound, don't
And
they?
the funny thing is with the 1176 is that we only had four at Ireland because, say we were using tape, which compresses anyway.
Hmm.
So we only had four compressors. We didn't compress much we need to put a compressor on this,
Ah.
we might put it on the vocal, might be a hint on a guitar or something, but we didn't do a lot of compression because the tape was there doing that for us. But those four 1176, they all sounded slightly different. They were all in theory the same model.
Yeah.
And they also sounded different whether you fired them up in the morning and worked with them or you were working with them when they'd been on for 10 hours, right? Because they just check, they warm up, they sound different.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right from when I first saw the first plug-in of 1176, I immediately kind of went, I wonder which one they sample, which one have they
Yeah. Yeah.
followed, because they all sounded different to me, whether they were silver or black, they all were slightly different, which I loved as well. That's partly why I think I like analog gear, is because it changes depending on whether it's hot or cold, and it depends on which model you've got, or whether it was built on a Tuesday or a Friday evening. They
Yeah.
all vary so much.
And like, I think that's the problem as well with plugins is like, if a plugin isn't oversampled, it adds like ridiculously amounts of like weird distortion and shit,
Yeah,
audible distortion and like phasey shit that you shouldn't have. So
yeah,
I think plugins that are oversampled sound a bit better, but you just can't beat that kind of like. I mean, it takes me forever mixing because I have like a little lunch box, those API lunch
yeah,
boxes.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
send
Great.
everything out to that, like individual things to the EQ and I have like a distortion-y kind of tape thing in it. And it takes
Yeah,
forever, but it sounds better. Like
yeah.
I'd love if
No,
plugins sounded amazing as the things, but fortunately they don't yet. Like,
I don't know if they ever will, because you're just dealing with this particular I mean, the thing about digital, that it's 20 hertz to 20k.
mm,
Analog goes way above 20k, and it goes below 20 hertz. You may not be able
mm.
to hear it, but it has an effect. So I worked on a desk about 15 years ago. It was either an old studio or a Neumann. I think it was a Neumann desk from the 30s or something ridiculous.
Wow.
And the top end, when you looked at I needed to add some top, and you look down and it says 20k or 30k. Like, what? But I added kind of 3 dB or something at 20k,
Mm,
and although I couldn't hear the 20k, it had an effect on the frequencies below it.
like okay,
So
yeah.
and it's smoother. It's beautiful. It just adds air. But
Uh-huh.
when I first saw that, it's like, who would ever build a desk? No 10k. It was like 20 or 30. It's like, who would build a desk like that? Because it didn't make sense in today's world.
Yeah.
But I mean, going back to the AV1, see, I always contradict myself, but we would have had difficulty recording what we recorded if we'd had, say, a 16-track tape machine, because we were moving things around and offsetting stuff and delaying, and we were doing that kind of with digital gear,
Ah,
and it would
okay.
have been quite hard to have got the same effect, especially on a 19-minute piece that we had on one of them. It would have been very hard to do that with tape, really. So
Uh-huh.
these little digital 4-track machines is partly the reason that we could we got what we did was because we were working in that format. So although I am not a lover of kind of Pro Tools or Logic or this whole digital thing, for
Yeah.
us, it was it was an ideal way to work.
Yeah. So when you that music, do you like mix it, or how do you are you mixing it as you're recording it, or are you mixing it
Some of it's
afterwards?
some of it's being mixed as we go along, or we
Yeah.
get the 4 tracks up and then do kind of a stereo bounce of that, and then add more things. And we had outboard, gear as well. We had drum machines that perhaps were running live. I mean, all the guitar parts and Mark Feltham or these. We had a Tibetan bowl that features quite a bit. All of that was kind of in real time and recorded to the digital. But
Uh-huh.
there were other things that were kind of running along with it. That
Okay.
it was in this kind of free space. And then once we were kind of okay, this is it. We would then do a mix, and our final stereo, in a way, was what's on the 4 track, whether it's been mixed down a few times, because you didn't lose any quality, obviously,
Yeah.
and the outboard stuff, and then we'd end up with kind of okay, that's our part one.
Okay. That's
It
cool.
was fun to do, and it was
Yeah.
also very portable because this thing was just like a little suitcase. So we could set it up in a house or a room somewhere. It wasn't like carting a proper tape machine around, which is a
Yeah.
nice. Um, I mean, we did it for Orang when I did the Orang project with Lee and Paul. We had a thing called a DMR8. I think it was Yamaha, and that literally was like this little. It was about kind of that big, and there were 8 faders with a switch. So you had 1 to 8, 9 to 16, 17 to 24. So you had a 24-track machine and a mixing desk, but also
Yeah.
individual tracks that were all built into this. And it had an SBX 90 on every channel. So for effects and things, so you
Yeah.
would literally, it took a while to get used to because again, you'd be listening to something and go, all right, and you'd go to like push the fader to get something and realize that you're actually on track 6 rather than on track 10 or whatever you should have been. So switch over and get your next lot up.
Yeah.
And they were moving faders, so the faders would move into whatever position fitted your balance.
Uh,
And we did the whole of Orang. The first album was done with that. I think they cost about
wow.
£16,000 at the time, which seems a lot of money now, but at the time it was kind of cutting edge technology. I mean, it
Yeah.
sounded. We did blow up speakers with it because with these SBX, we got into this thing of playing around with like feedbacks, and we got into a negative feedback that just ran away with us, but I couldn't get to the controls quick enough, and it just spiraled down and it blew out the speakers because it went, whatever
Oh
frequency.
shit. Yeah.
The cones just kind of did that. But we had that synced up to a little 8-track Tascam, I think it was,
Okay.
and my Revox, various bits of outboard, and we did the album like that. And we had virtually the first 2 tracks of Pro Tools. I mean, that's all we had were 2 tracks. And once we had things that, if Lee wanted to edit stuff, because he was very much into taking something and then messing about with it, we
Yeah.
would put that into the 2 tracks of Pro Tools. And then he'd spend a few hours, editing, messing around, just lo-fi or whatever. And then once it was finished, it would be regurgitated out and back into our DMR
Oh,
16.
cool. Good.
DMR, yeah. But that was
Good.
good. I mean, that was a good little unit.
Yeah.
And it's the only way, again, that we could have set up a little studio in Tottenham. We had a proper control room and a great live room, but it was the only way that we could get gear that we could make a record with that wasn't a 24-track tape machine, which obviously needs a lot of care.
Right.
And we were trying to move things around a lot. So it fitted perfectly for that. As with the AV1, although we were on this really basic, like 4-track, you could do so much with it.
Yeah.
It was exciting.
Do you listen to a lot of the records that you worked on? Do you ever like just pull one out
Um,
and go, I'll have a little listen to this?
Sometimes, I mean, there are albums. Every so often I might, put on an old Robert Palmer with Little Feat album or something, just because I love, the vibe of those records. But I mean, it's like, once a year or something. Spirit of Eden, I listen to perhaps once or twice a year. Laughing Stock, I don't really listen to. Um, so yeah, I don't play a lot of my own records, but every so often, um, I'll put on a Faithless thing,
Yeah.
or there's a particular track off the last album I did with Maxi Jazz called Mass Destruction, which I absolutely adore. So if I'm in the mood for a bit of full on party, crank up the tannoys and put on Mass Destruction. So occasionally I play things, but yeah, and also strangely over the last, especially through the lockdown, that when you think, well, you're stuck at home, not really doing anything, I didn't really listen to a lot of music. I just kind of drifted
Oh,
completely from listening,
oh,
which I don't
right.
know quite why, but I think went hand in hand with me just kind of going, I've done this for 50 years. I've had enough. I need to stop really listening. So over the last 8 months, I've definitely got back into listening to more music. I mean, I can't say I listen to much modern music because I haven't found, I mean, there's a few things that I like, but most of it is all so generic. It all sounds the same to me. I
Yeah.
mean, they're
Yeah.
all using the same plugins, the same approach, that terrible vocoder voice, which drives me crazy. I mean, even Adele now, they've started doing it to Adele, and you just think, Adele can sing.
Yeah.
Why do you have to do this, to get, but it's a sound that, I mean, there's a girl that I saw about 3 months ago who learned to sing by listening to modern records, and she can sing like she's got a like that vocal sound.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when
Yeah.
she sings, it's like shit. And it's not treatment; it's the way she sings, because it's just like listen to these records, and like you do. When I was a kid, you'd play drums or play guitar, something to records that and you obviously weren't as good as the record, but that's how you kind of learn. And
Yeah.
this girl obviously learned by listening to a lot of these modern records, so she can sing like that. That's bizarre.
It's a weird like that quest for like making everything perfect has made everything imperfect.
Yeah.
Like it's shit. Like
I
there's
hate perfect. I don't
yeah,
understand what perfect is. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's an impossible thing to, and it's all personal opinion, I suppose, as to what is perfect. But records are all perfect, and where they're all perfectly in time, perfectly in tune. They all sound plastic to me. They just don't sound real. And
yeah,
then you put on some, Neil Young record or something where I wouldn't say his vocals are particularly brilliantly in tune sometimes, or there's a guitar that's not great in tune. Bob Dylan's the same.
yeah,
And the records just come alive because they feel, you can see somebody sitting there playing. Whereas the problem I have with a lot of modern music is that I just don't see musicians playing. I just hear this finished perfection
yeah,
and overuse of reverbs and things. It's all just too clean and too good.
yeah. Everything has that kind of same, and it's the chords I think as well that do my head in. It's like there's no even like it's like oh I might just throw a weird augmented chord in there. It's like no, let's just use the same fucking four shit chords. You're
And
like
I'm
oh
sure
dude.
when we spoke last time when we were doing all the talk to us stuff, but I mean it was Mark who originally started all this when we were doing Spirit of Eden, and I'd get sounds and things up if somebody's playing something, and he'd say to me, "It sounds too good," and it just took me ages for him to grasp what he actually meant, because it's like, well, that isn't that what we're after? We're after making things sound good or great, And all the time you'd get stuff up. He goes, "No, it sounds too good. The part's too good, or the sound's too good, or just can you." And there were stories in that Perfect Silence book where the keyboard player had his fingers taped together, so he couldn't play the piano the note how he would. He's got his fingers, so he's playing like a monkey.
Yeah, yeah,
It was all done to try and get something that wasn't just another perfect performance. But it took
yeah,
me a while to understand. And now, because of where we've been in the last 30 years, I totally understand what Mark was about. I don't want perfection. I don't want plastic. I
Yeah.
want something that actually, kind of moves you or makes you at least get absorbed into what you're listening to. And I don't think you get that when it's all just pristine.
Yeah. That's the funny thing about those, him saying that about the Toe Talk records. For me, they just sound so incredibly, and I know there's the perfect, isn't there's what is perfect, but they just sound like if someone asked me what's one of the best sounding records, I always say it's Spirit of Eden. It's always
Yeah,
at my top list, or like maybe Steely Dan at Asia or
yeah.
something like that. But it's they like that record to me just sounds so
It
amazing.
does
Like,
sound remarkable, but I think, like you said before, it's all a bit of an illusion
right.
because it's not all played. Sometimes it's just individual notes that are moved and things are constructed.
Mm,
But the genius is that it feels like five guys in a room performing, and you get totally sucked in and absorbed by that. It just feels amazing. And
mm.
I do think it sounds great, but it's not through trying to make it sound perfect at all. I mean, we kept mistakes, we kept takes that weren't the best that people had performed, but had something about them that, specifically Mark would pick up on. But I do think Spirit of Eden, I've come around to kind of loving that record after going through all kinds of different traumas. And I do think it's an amazing adventure to listen to that album.
Yeah.
Laughing Stock, I still can't really listen to I can listen to After the Flood because I just think that's a remarkable track.
Amazing.
The bass on it, for a start, that just goes to the center of the earth, and just the intensity of it all. It's humid, it's claustrophobic, it's remarkable. But I can't listen to the album as an album, top to bottom. It just freaks me out still.
Will you ever get to the point that you'll be like, okay,
I
I'll
don't
give it?
know, because the thing is, it's I think, like I say, I might not listen to it for over a year. I didn't listen to it for about 7 years,
Wow.
um, and then you kind of think, oh well, maybe today's the day, and you put it on, and even now, 30 years later, you 2 or 3 minutes in, and my whole mood seems to change. I mean, and
Really?
not necessarily in a really good way,
Wow.
um, because it brings back too much of the process. It brings back too much of just how difficult the album was. I can listen to After the Flood. That's the
Yeah.
one I can put on and just lose myself in it. Although whether I play it to the end is debatable.
Oh,
I
wow.
don't always, you know, go through the whole 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah.
But I just love the whole way it starts, and the textures on it, and the intensity, and the melodies, and these beautiful moments, which just are these releases of wonderful little melodies and things. So
Yeah.
I can get off on that. But as an album, I still don't really feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. I remember the first time I heard it, I loved it, but even for me, and I didn't work on it, there's a slightly unnerving sound about it. I remember the first time I put it out, I was like, wow, it was like, that is not like Spirit of Eden. Because Spirit of Eden
No,
has this kind of slight hope to it or something like that, if that
it
makes sense. I
does.
don't know.
It's a really positive album, I think, Spirit of Eden. I mean, it's quite beautiful.
Yeah.
Even with all the intensity, once that dies away, and then you go into something, it works brilliantly. Laughing Stock yeah, it's probably always going to be a problem for me. Just even the first track where it sounds like Lee's just setting his kit up in the room rather than playing.
Yeah.
It's all just so not fragmented. It's not really the right word, but I mean, I remember when we finished Laughing Stock, that's when he kind of pretty much left working with Mark, but he kind of went, there's nowhere else to go.
Mm.
We erased 95% of what we recorded, so what's left is the bare bones of all the stuff we had, and some of that, like After the Flood, is still intense. It's 100 odd tracks of analog on it,
Wow.
but yeah, but there's you listen to it, there's 5 or 6 instruments, and then
Mm.
there's all this other texture, which is fans or boiling kettles and all this stuff to just create this amazing texture. But Tim's kind of said, where do you go from here? It just felt as
Yeah.
if we exhausted it all, which I think
Yeah.
is why, there's a 7 year gap or something when Mark did his solo album. And that is a very, very different kind of record. I mean, it's, it's phenomenally quiet, and but it's a completely different vibe and structure to Laughing Stock.
Yeah, well, that wasn't. You can listen to that one still, can you? Mark
Yeah,
Solo.
yeah, I can listen to that.
Okay,
But I
that's
think
funny.
that the trilogy for me really was, in a way, is Colour of Spring, Spirit of Eden, Laughing Stock. I think those three, I can see a real link between them all. Partly because having worked on Spirit of Eden and realised how much the variophone was being used, you can now spot it, or I can spot it in Colours of Spring. So I think those three albums are in a way a trilogy. And then, Mark's solo album is just something fresh and different again, and
Yeah,
that is quite remarkable, just because it feels, if you play it like he said, if in an interview I saw him do, he said if you play it at a low level, like in the proper acoustic level for the instruments you're listening to, you do feel as if you're just in that room and these people are just there in front of you performing. That's, and I still get that.
yeah,
So I can listen to that one, although I think I played it about 8 months ago. So I mean, it's not something I play very often.
yeah. It does have that old school kind of jazz vibe of an old
Yeah,
like Blue Note record or something like that,
yeah,
or
yeah.
Verve record. It just has that kind of vibe, to it. Would you say like the working on the Talk or anything else that was your like what would be your favorite moments like recording that you were just like, because I know you were definitely immersed in the Talk and stuff. It's like
Yeah,
that
no,
your brain.
totally. I mean, I think I will be remembered probably for Spirit of Eden.
Mm,
I think that it was a bit of a, still, although I understand it's still a high point in a way, just because of the madness of how we did it, but also how well it turned out in a way. Um, but it's really difficult because, things like Live at the Lyceum with Bob Marley, that was a fantastic thing to
yeah,
mix. You know what I mean? That was such an energy and a vibe doing that. I loved working with Robert Palmer on those first two or three albums when you're working with like Little Feat or the Meters or James Jameson. So there were moments like that which I just remember as being just such an adventure.
yeah,
And I still love those albums because of what, it brings back that kind of vibe. And they are great records. But it's very hard to pin it all down onto kind of, a specific thing. And I think, if Spirit of Eden is definitely up there in the top 5 or top 10 of things where, yeah, you kind of, I don't know, proud. I mean, yeah, proud of it or pleased the way it turned out. And it also still emotionally affects me because, I mean, I can play some of the things I did,
yeah,
which might at the time affected me, which have just become a record in a way.
yeah.
But that still always gets through in various levels.
Yeah, it's probably because you're like, I think you, the band, and Tim, it's like the all year kind of very synonymous with that record. Well, I think
Yeah,
when people who know Talk, they know Tim. It's unusual for people to know the producer as well and the engineer so tightly to it. And I think that's such a part of the sound and the being of those records.
yeah, I think I'd agree in a way because most of, well, that and Love and Stuff, but most of it was just Tim, Mark, and myself, in the room for 12 hours a day for however many months. So, musicians would come and go. I had the assistant obviously was a big part of it. Um, but the rest, once Paul had finished his parts, he'd gone. Lee, in a way, was semi-banned by Mark. He didn't want him hanging around at the back of the room. So it was just the three of us in the dark.
Yeah.
So the three of us definitely had a particular kind of relationship for that period of time.
Mm.
Um, it all, all kind of went a bit awry, as all these things do, years down the line. But again, I put some of that down to the management. And if you read that Perfect Silence,
A
a
great
lot of
book.
the things that happened to me happened to, people that Mark was writing with, people that put all their life into this thing and then don't even get a credit or something.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff that's happened since which makes you a bit sad about it all.
Mm.
But if you just think back to making that record, that almost year we spent in the studio was just remarkable.
Yeah. What was it like working with Traffic?
That was that was huge because it was my first rock session, when I was 17 or 16 or something.
That's
And I'd done
crazy,
my,
man. You were that
yeah,
age. That's so crazy, dude. I love it.
I'd done my kind of month's trial, to see if I was going to be, accepted as a tape op.
Yeah.
And I worked with Keith Grant for a month, who was the owner of Olympic. And he used to do and we were on 4-track, analog 4-track. And he'd do these like 50-piece orchestras, which he would record and mix at the same time to 2 tracks of a 4-track machine. That's genius. I mean, really, that was my first month of education. We did Dusty Springfield, Leonard Cohen,
Wow.
Nita Harris, Harry Seacombe, but with these big orchestras to 4-track. And that was it was like, wow. And then, because I passed my month and was considered safe, they said, right, you can do a rock session. In fact, on Thursday evening, Traffic had come in, you could work on that. And it was doing the title track for Mr. Fantasy.
Wow.
So they came in, and that was my first real rock session was, and Steve Winwood was a year older than me, so he was about 18, although he'd had, 5 years of success with Spencer Davis. So he was about 18. And again, from daylight sessions, lots of light, people reading scores, union controlled, 3-hour sessions, but you had to take a break. Suddenly you're in a night session with Traffic, and it's in the dark with the odd candle, the odd light, friends sitting in the studio, hanging out, rolling spliffs. It was just another world. So that was my first introduction to that. And I loved working with Traffic. I did most of the second Traffic album as well.
Wow. Sound
In
great.
'68, when I think we were on 8-track then. But no, I loved working with Traffic and had and I did carry on working with like Jim Capaldi and with Steve Winwood, years later. But that it still had a huge effect on me, because that's my comment to Mark when he kind of said, so what sums up Olympic for you? That's what I said, well, 1 o'clock in the morning, November '67. And he went, exactly, Traffic. And it still has stuck with me, definitely. The vibe, the energy, and the freedom. That was the thing. It was suddenly freedom to make a record rather than sitting up, mic stands and making tea for 50 musicians and all being very controlled union. Suddenly, it's like whatever you want to do.
Wow. At that age, that's just incredible, man. Like, I think what I was doing at that age, I was like fucking sitting on a bench somewhere in town.
I know, but we all kind of, because the job didn't really exist as a job, when I was at school, so that it wasn't like came up on a curriculum. I only really found out about it because of my older brother, Terry Brown, who was, 3 years older than me and had been working for Olympic when they were in Baker Street. So I knew this job existed, and I'd hung out on sessions. I mean, I went and sat on Yardbird sessions and things like that.
Oh, that's class.
When I was about 13 or 14.
Oh, man, come on.
I know. So when I was 16, I was kind of, you did start work earlier back then, I think. I didn't do university. It was hard to get into university.
Yeah.
So you got a day job, and that's what I wanted to do. And luckily, I mean, I've had a lot of luck. I got, given this month's trial and then got a job there, and had a remarkable year. I mean, the people I worked with, I did a lot of stuff with Glyn Johns in the end. But I mean, I worked with Hendrix and Traffic, the Rolling Stones, the Small Faces.
Wow. Did you
Steve Miller Band.
Did you meet Jimmy?
Yeah.
Wow. What was he like?
I worked with him on All Along the Watchtower.
Oh, dude. Oh, yeah, you said that in your book with Eddie Kramer. Wasn't he producing that?
Yeah, Eddie Kramer.
Yeah.
He was lovely. Jimmy was really quite shy and very polite and just very much into working. You know what I mean? He wasn't in the studio partying. He was a lovely guy. But yeah, I mean, it was an incredible year from experience to work with people like Keith Grant, Glyn Johns, Eddie Kramer to a certain degree, and be around people like Denny Cordell, Jimmy Miller. They had a massive effect on me. I was 16, 17 years old. I was so not. I lived in a very. I lived in North Watford. I was brought up in a very strict school with very straight parents. And suddenly you're in this world, and that year had a huge effect on the even. Even now, when I was doing stuff like with definitely with Talk Talk 30 years ago, but I was bringing into those sessions stuff I'd learned in 1967, 68,
Yeah.
because that's what Mark wanted to know, how we mic'd things back then. And and it was like, well, the desk only had 12 channels, so we didn't have mics, hundreds of mics on the drums. It was like 3 or 4. And we might sometimes things were from a distance because they had to include other musicians, So all of that way of working, not using much EQ, and all of that came out of, really, I realized kind of later, but it came out of that time at Olympic when we had one compressor, which was homemade, a desk that was homemade, a 4-track Ampex, 2 echo plates. And those records sound phenomenal because of the engineers and also the sound of the room and the mics and just the way everybody worked then. There was this energy.
Yeah.
Because people were playing together in a room. And there was this. That's what we created in a way with Spirit of Eden. It created this illusion that there's these guys all playing together in a room when they weren't. They were all individually pieced together. But that's partly one of the things I miss. Is that whole vibe of having a 5-piece band in a room recording. It's just, you can't beat it.
Do you think that's probably as well what's added to what's missing in modern music? That people in a room hanging out for like 12 hours and you're talking and you're bouncing ideas off each other. It's so different to go, here, I'll send you a file across the ocean and you put a guitar to it.
Totally.
It's different, isn't it?
I did an experiment back in, I think it was either the very late 70s or the very early 80s, because as technology improved, or as we got more of it, it became more common to try and get separation and to overdub things, rather than have everybody in a room where you didn't have much control because you got leakage and things. And I did a test one day. I had this 5-piece band in, and we recorded a track as a 5-piece band. And then we put that aside and then copied the drums, I think, and then got everybody to go out and play individually exactly what they'd just played, but one at a time. And then so we had 2 versions. We had a version that was all live and a version that was the same instrumentation, but done as overdubs. And we mixed them both and then just played them. And they were, I won't say totally different, but you could tell they were different. The one where everyone is in the room, it just had this energy, it had this size to it because of leakage, this rawness. It was just like so exciting. And then you had the other version, which was cleaner, perhaps better from an engineering point of view, but didn't have anything like the energy. And once I did that, I went, right, okay, as long as I can, I want to record with as many live people as possible. So even if it was an overdub, I might do 2 things at once, so there's a guy out there doing a bass overdub or something, but we'd get somebody playing guitar or piano at the same time, just to create some energy between them, and it wasn't also kind of strict and slick. And now everything's done one at a time. You just have a couple of mics that you like, and it's one person at a time, like you say, sending files to different people who put a part on at home, and all of that, which is great that you can get people that live on the other side of the world to play on your record.
Class,
that's the positive side. But if only you could get all those guys together in a room, imagine what you'd have.
I know. Like, even if you listen to those old, like, we'll say the Beach Boys records with the Wrecking Crew, and even before that, like Spectre stuff, that shit sounds, I mean, it's distorting as fuck, but it doesn't sound great. Like, the energy out of it.
I mean, Spectre was a genius, and to get, having like 2 bass players, electric bass, upright bass, 3 guitarists, all in the room at once, and he'd spend hours, getting the balance right because they had limited amount of mics, and it was going to mono most of the stuff in the early days. I think he was a genius. And the Beach Boys, who I'm massive fans of, I've watched quite a bit of footage where they're doing their vocals.
It's incredible.
And they're just round one mic, and they're doing all these amazing parts and pointing at each other for cue. It's just like, man, this is genius. Because you listen to the finished record and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Then you see how they record it and go, wow, those guys are on another planet.
Oh, totally. totally. Like Brian was such a genius. I remember when I was like 16, 17 maybe, I'd learn all the different harmonies of the Beach Boys songs. And like even something like In My Room, when you listen to the backing
Yeah,
harmonies, you're like and you separate, you're like, wow, that sounds odd on its own. That's only when it all comes together. Like
yeah.
the genius of that guy. I
Well,
don't think a
yeah.
lot of people get it.
No, those records are just incredible, and how they were making them again on 4-track machines.
Yeah.
There were a lot of editing. I mean, when I first got the like a CD version of Beach Boys, you can hear the edits much clearer in a way. You can kind of tell, oh,
Right,
right,
right.
that's what they did. They cut there, and then it goes into this whole other section, which is obviously recorded at a different time to the bit before. But when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just sit on the vinyl, because of it being vinyl, and maybe there's a little bit at the time when you don't really hear the edits the same way. But
Yeah.
once I heard it on digital, it's like, right, okay, this makes sense how they were doing this, because it's genius.
Yeah.
And
A
Phil
good
Spector is a big hero. I just think the guy, I know he was tricky, and I've read a lot on him, and I knew a woman that worked for him, and it's true. He used to lock people in his mansion and not let them go home. He'd pull guns on people,
fuck,
all of
dude.
that. But he was a genius for actually making records, and he wrote a lot of those songs as well,
Yeah.
which I never realized at first.
Yeah, it's people forget.
Yeah,
Like that Christmas album is fucking class. That just brilliant. They just sound, oh man, they just have that sound that none of it, like that stuff doesn't, you don't hear that in modern records. You just don't
no,
hear it. That the energy, like just
yeah,
like, and everything's, it's like nothing super clear, like instrument wise, but it's like this, like like you said, the
yeah.
wall
But
of sound. But
it
it's
is,
just, yeah, it's just got that
it
vibe.
is phenomenal. I mean, I worked with Carol Kay in the
Oh
'70s.
wow, did you?
Yeah. Well, through Robert Palmer. You see, Robert Palmer, um, because of the way we worked with Little Feat, worked the meters, but then we got into this thing of just putting our own bands together. So I got
Ah,
to work with James Jamerson, Carol Kay, Bob
class.
Babbitt, all these Motown guys, Ed Green, because we just make up lists of our heroes, and then this brilliant guy Steve Smith would phone around for a few weeks, and then we'd be in LA or in New Orleans or something with these musicians. And Carol Kay had played on a lot of the Phil Spector things. She was the electric bass player, and then they had a guy playing the upright bass.
And Beach Boys did all those Beach Boys records too.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, another planet. And
Yeah,
it's, in a way, it's sad that we've lost, we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, if you know what I mean. We've got all this technology now, but if only we could have the kind of energy and the experimental side of what the Beach Boys and Phil Spector were doing. We seem to have lost some of that. It's very hard to be experimental with a Pro Tools rig, I find,
yeah,
because it is you're working a particular format, so it's very hard to just be so, you know, playing tapes at different speeds, which was a big thing with the Beatles and with the Beach Boys, where they'd track things, but they'd slow it down a little bit or speed it up. I mean, the Beatles did a lot where they'd record it at like 12 and a half IPS
yeah.
and in a
And slow
lower
it down. Yeah,
key, and
yeah,
then put it up to 15, and it would tighten the band so they'd sound tighter, give you a particular kind of sound. They were experimenting because had such basic equipment.
yeah.
Even at Olympic with the 4-track and then the 8-track, you came up with so many, using the stairwell to record Charlie Watts because you wanted this big sound, but how do you do it? You haven't got a plug-in, so I'll stick him in the stairwell. It was all a bit. It seems a bit kind of random and that, but it was exciting because people were thinking on the spot of how to come up with a particular sound,
Which is
and I
creative.
love
Like,
it. I love all that.
did you ever hear they released that Revolver? What they did was quite incredible. The way they released Revolver, but did a stereo mix of it, and they were able to use
Yeah, yeah,
AI. Like it does sound incredible. Like Jesus Christ! But they had the original version of Rain that they played ridiculously fast, so that they knew they were going to slow it down. And when you hear the fast version, you're like, that just sounds bizarre. It's like some Benny Hill sketch because it's so like tick, 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 just
yeah.
so fast, and then the slow down version just works so perfectly because they knew they were going to slow it down. You're like, just class, man.
Yeah, it
Very
is.
speedy. That
Yeah,
was the
yeah,
term,
yeah.
yeah.
Very speeds because although these tape machines were, basic, we had at Olympic we had 3 identical Ampex 4-track machines, which is why tape phasing was so easy to do back then, and they all had very speeds, and the quarter inch had very speeds. partly because of tape delay echoes and things. So you always had everything had various speeds on it. So you could do that much easier. Um, and obviously some of the Ataris or some of the Studios had various speed, but a lot of the time it was 15 or 30.
Ah,
So,
okay.
back in the 60s and early 70s, a lot of those tape machines, the various speed was always built in. It was always there because it was a big part of how you made records.
Yeah. It's the thing about slowing down and speeding up. Like what I started to do in a few years ago is I'd map out, like you get your time. And like I put in, we'd say like say something was 80, I'd put in 80 and then the next bar would be 82 and then 83 and then maybe 81 and I do all this like I mean the click is constantly changing. But
Yeah,
I know it's small, but it does give you that kind of that you
yeah.
cannot, like there's something about those old records, they're speeding up and they're slowing down
Speeding
and
up
they're
in the
speeding.
chorus, pulling it back for
Yes.
the verse. I loved all that.
Yeah, me too, man. It
And those
just has,
guys were, they were brilliant at being able to do that. They're just kicking it up a beat or two
yeah,
and then pulling it. But I loved it when it was like pulled back after the chorus into the verse. I mean, all of
yeah,
that. But then, in the 80s, when everything started to be done to a click, because that all started really in the 80s, when all of that kind of music, went with the digital and the big drums that are huge and everything synced up to other things. So you had to kind of run to a click. That's when the start of that started to change when
yeah,
we were all working with clicks.
yeah,
But no, I loved that. And those guys that are good at it, it's seamless.
yeah,
And when you get
yeah.
five guys in a room, especially that LA lot, they would do that even then. They'd all be together playing, but the chorus they'd kick it up and pull it back, and they'd all be together. So it just feels totally natural.
That must have been class in some of those
Genius.
sessions.
A classic with James Jameson. I think he was doing a Marvin Gaye, probably on What's Going On album, and he was so out of it, he just lay on the floor and played, and it's still remarkable. You know what I mean? But the first time we worked with him was for I think on the third Robert Palmer album on Some People Can Do What They Like, and I mean he was just stunning. And halfway through the track, he just goes off into this bass solo, which wasn't planned.
Mm.
And it became like the master tape. And at the
Wow.
end of it, he's going, that's for you, God, and, getting into this whole thing in the studio with his religion. And then we went back a few months later and booked him again.
Mm.
And he was just gone. He just couldn't really play. He was just so fucked
Oh,
up.
oh shit,
So
man.
unfortunately, that was, I think, his, the devil was for him was
Ah,
alcohol, I think. But lovely guy. I mean, again, he wasn't aggressive or unpleasant in any way. He was a lovely guy. But working with him was a real, when you were saying earlier, that was a high point, I must
yeah,
admit.
yeah, man. That's
Because
class.
what's going on, I just thought was one of the best albums ever made. And it
Yeah,
still is lyrically. It could have been, it would fit the times we live in now almost better than it did in the 70s. It's such a brilliant album, brilliant lyrics.
it's like a
The whole
Motown.
world is falling apart.
Oh my God, man. This fucking Ireland's a fucking joke. Jesus Christ. It's a fucking joke. What's going on always reminded me of like a soul version of Pet Sounds, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah,
Like the way everything kind of melds into each other, like you have that kind of, you have different motifs, that kind of the motif that comes back in all
yeah,
the time. And
yeah.
it's a beautiful record.
It is, and again, with all these record companies, they're always behind. I don't think I've ever. Well, Chris Blackwell possibly is the exception with Ireland. He was very much, he gambled, took lots of chances, but he was very much looking for now or the future. So if he came up with a crazy idea,
Mm.
if he intrigued him, he'd go with it. But most of the
Yeah.
other records I dealt with, they're always like a year or so behind what's really happening on the streets. So when Marvin Gaye delivered that, they weren't, it was like, what's this? You know? And that's happened for so many people when they've delivered the record and they've gone, what's this? I mean, it happened with Spirit of Eden, obviously.
Yeah.
It happened with Colours of Spring. When they gave them Colours of Spring, EMI said, well, there's no singles on this. And we've ended up with about 4 hit singles off that album alone, but they said, oh, there's no singles because it wasn't the kind of Duran stuff that they'd been doing before, But record companies, they're just not, they're so short-sighted.
Yeah.
And you push for years to try and get something that's a bit different, say, to the norm, and they always turn you down, or and then somebody breaks through with that, and then all they want is loads of people that are like that, So you could never win really, because
No.
they turn you down when you've got something that's not in fashion, but then when it's successful, they just want loads of other things that are like that, and you've moved on to something else. Oh no, that's not what it's just like you're always fighting it. Well, I've always felt I've been fighting it.
Yeah, they're. I think I'm sure you've so much more experience than I do, obviously. But the ones that I met at the start, you kind of all the stuff they say to you, you'd swear you're like the second coming of Jesus. They say these lovely. You're like,
Oh,
wow,
yeah.
you're like, wow, and then you never hear from them again. You're like, dude, what the hell, bro?
Yeah.
What
No,
was all
that's
that
that.
stuff?
That's the classic. I mean, I've done it with, not that long ago, but I mean, I did a fantastic band in 2000s called 10,000 Things, which were the singer, a guy called he's now an actor. He's been in lots of movies, but he was a special kind of character. He was obviously great things were going to happen, but they were a fantastic band. They were like the Who when the Who started out, in a way. They had this
Cool.
ridiculous energy, and the songs were great lyrics. And the record company came down. We did it at a place called the Chapel, which is up in Lincolnshire.
Right.
And they were a pretty wild bunch of guys. I mean, lovely guys, quite young, but quite hard to actually keep under control in a way. But the record company came down and listened to what we'd done for the last week or two and loved it. They were just going, man, this is fucking brilliant. All this, like you say, the second coming. And then we get to London and I do the mixes, which are pretty much along the lines of everything they'd heard so far. And the A&R guy turns up. He goes, well, no, this isn't right, And I went, okay, and what's wrong with it? This is the band.
Yeah.
And because of the way it was all done live, but I mean, there was a limit to what you could change, right? So you could have the drums quiet or you know what I mean? It was just like, and they go, no, I think we need to get someone else to remix this, all of that stuff.
Oh,
but I hung in there and eventually finished the record. And the whole process with the record company, who had been raving about them and then went cold once it was finished.
Yeah.
The whole band imploded and split up. So the whole band was like, it's short-lived. It lasted for about 18 months at the most, But they played this gig in London. My brother was over in Canada, and I said, "Oh, you must come along." So we went to this gig, and he did Rush and things, and he was blown away by it. He said, "Man, this is like watching the Who in 1964. This is incredible. Wow, well done. You've got a great record here." 3 months later, the band's completely disintegrated.
Oh, no.
The record company have written it off, and me, as being a complete loser. It's just like, wow, but we were all on the same wavelength once upon it. You know what I mean? That's what always, like you say, it's like, then they don't talk to you, or you can't get hold of somebody, or, you just go, wow, what happened there? All I've done is do what I was doing. They loved the roughs. I haven't screwed it up or made it too perfect. What's happened now? But they just, I was in a, and it even goes back to Robert Palmer, because he had 3 albums: of Sneaking Sally, Pressure Drop, Some People, were all failures. Right? They never made money at the time. And Chris Blackwell was so into Robert that when we did Sneaking Sally and it didn't really do anything, he said, don't worry, go and make another record. He was so much into Robert. Brilliant. And I remember this meeting, I think it was for Pressure Drop, and we came back with the finished album being recorded with Little Feat, The Meters, LA, a great little album. And we were in I guess it's to an A&R meeting. Blackwell wasn't there, unfortunately. And so we played the record, and there's Steve Smith, the producer, myself, and Robert Palmer. And initially, around the table of about 7 or 8 people, they, the vibe is good. They're going, this is really good, man. That's great, Robert. You've got a nice album here. And then one person said, yeah, I'm not sure about this. Right? And I didn't think, I was like, yeah, fine, you don't think about it. But everyone else likes this. And suddenly, round the room, you just watched it all go, where somebody else said, yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I thought track 3, right? And we came out of that meeting with a failure. And yet 5 minutes in after they'd heard the album, it was a winner. They loved it. And this one guy put the doubt in. And as soon as there's a doubt, because of the nature of record company people, it's like, well, I can't seem to be saying this is brilliant because it may not happen. Maybe he's right, you know. So that album was written off. But
Oh,
Blackwell, when he said, "Oh, go and make another one," you know, we didn't have a hit till the fourth album. Now today,
uh,
you wouldn't even get past the first album,
no,
you know, or the
no,
first single or something.
no.
But Blackwell was so believed in Robert and loved the albums that we were making that he just said, right. And then we had a hit with Every Kind of People off the fourth album. But that's the only hit after four albums, you know.
Wow.
They never recouped. And then Robert went on to be huge, you know.
Yeah,
But
isn't it mad? Like talking to yourself and other people, that's always a thing that's said is that some people back years ago got chances. Like Springsteen got chances, and you're saying
yeah,
Rob Palmer got chances. Like like there's no chance given now. There's no like let's develop this person. It's like don't have a hit, fuck off, get on to the
yeah.
next one. And you're
But they don't develop, you know, because in the
yeah,
past they used to have this. Used to be able to get money for. I can't remember what the term was now, but say you went in with a demo and they kind of liked it, they
okay.
would give you a certain amount of money. I wish I could think of the word, but anyway, basically to go off and do some more stuff, and you know this allows the artist to function for 3 or 4 months. It wasn't huge amounts of money, but it was
Okay.
kind of they would give you some money so that you could actually move it to the next level. I mean, it happened with like Red Box, which is a band I'd spent 3 years pushing, and eventually we kind of got signed to a small label. Here's a classic. I went to Warner Brothers because I knew Max Hull, who ran that at the time, and he was an old mate of mine.
Yeah.
And I went in there with Red Box, and he listened to it, and he went, "Yeah, yeah, this is pretty cool." He said, "But I just don't think it's for us." And I went, "Fine." Got him signed eventually to something like Cherry Red or something, who signed him. As soon as that record came out, Max is on the phone saying, "Come in and see us." So
Oh,
we all went in and he signed a huge deal with them to Warner Brothers. He just needed somebody else to kind of show faith in this band, you know. But you used to get this kind of money to, you know, explore the next possibility, to do a few demos or to do a proper single. That all stopped years ago. And
yeah.
I've heard that in A&R companies now, you might have one guy who's like an old-fashioned A&R guy, and there'll be four people there who just spend all day trawling through sites on the internet to see had the most hits on Spotify, or who's had 1 million views on this, and then who are unsigned. Then they approach them and say, "Would you like a record deal?" Because they've already got an audience of people.
Yeah.
They've already done the hard work. And when I've had 3 or 4 artists that have come to me with that offer, and I've said, "Look, why are you going to now give? You've got to this point on your own, and with a true following of fans, you know, why are you now going to sign a record deal and give all your control to somebody else when you've done all the hard work?" You know, in the old days, record companies were needed to give you that kind of bank loan to make a record, you know,
Yeah.
at very high interest rates. You know, you got 12% for a record for the artist. So the record company making 88%. So their investment, which it is still a very high return.
Yeah.
And a lot of the major record companies worked on a ratio of 2 to 10. So they'd sign 10 bands, they only needed two to be successful because they would pay for the eight that aren't. That was the kind of maths that these people thought. And now all of that's gone. So now it's just if you've got a massive following, yeah, you can probably get a deal and get a release. But why would you? Is my
I,
attitude.
I know. So, I remember I put out a single in September, October, and I got the usual emails. I got a guy who wanted to sign me to a label, and he literally said, "We own all your music." I was like, "What do you mean we own your music?" He was like, "Oh, we own it." I was like, "Yeah, but I'm not going to give you 100% of my rights." He goes, "Oh no, but loads of people take that deal. It's good for them." I was like I did all this work on it, and you just want to own all my music in perpetuity. And it was worded like in all the universe or something like that.
Yeah,
It was like
yeah.
this
Oh, yeah.
ridiculous term. I was like, who would
Well, there's
take this?
there's two things there. One, I can't remember his name now. I don't know if it was the classic Peter Grant character or this other producer, but they went into a record deal, and that's what it was. It was like, this territory and the world, and they said, "I want the universe added to that." Right? And they were kind of, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Look, and this was before they landed a man on the moon. So this is somebody in the 60s. So it could be Peter Grant or Don Arden or something."
Right.
And they said, "Well, yeah, but one day, music might be played from another planet." And everyone thought the guy was an idiot, so they agreed, right? It's like, yeah. And then when men landed on the moon, if they landed on the moon, they played a Frank Sinatra song or some song from the moon. So this guy was then seen as a genius because he'd
Wow.
said, "Well, I want it for this territory, the world, and the
Wow.
universe." And he was proved right.
The fucking snakes. They're doing
Madness.
it. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you were saying about your love for the Beach Boys, do you like a lot of the kind of later 60s stuff like Wild Honey and Sunflower and stuff like that? Sunflower 1970s. Do you like those records?
Do you know? Yes, one of them rings a bell. Sunshine.
Sunflower.
Sunflower. I'm not
Yeah.
sure I've heard a lot of the later
Some
Beach
of those
Boys.
are great. Some
I'll
of those are
check it out.
great.
Most of
What
my knowledge is the classic kind of 60s Beach Boys.
Pet Sounds today, all
Pet
that kind
Sound,
of
the
stuff.
early stuff, Pet Sounds, Smile.
Yeah, Smile just that is like incredible.
It
Like
nearly destroyed him, though, didn't it? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
in fact, it did at the time. It took 20, 30 years for it to really be finished properly.
yeah.
I mean, if you ever get a chance, you should check out when the Beach Boys played Glastonbury. It's about 12, 15 years ago now. It is a treat, man. It's unbelievable. He's
Oh
got
yeah.
this huge band. They were a covers band. Brian went, he was out somewhere,
They went
not in,
solo. Is that when Brian
sorry.
went solo? When Brian went solo, was it?
It was, yeah, yeah. This is years after the kind of Beach Boys thing. This is only probably 20, 25 years ago, but he was somewhere. I think it might be Hawaii or somewhere like that. And he saw this covers band
Oh,
doing the Beach
yeah,
Boys.
the Wondermints they're called.
And they were so good. He said,
Yeah,
right. And he just basically took the whole band and that became his band. So at Glastonbury, he's just got this incredible band of musicians
yeah.
and they're all multi-instrumentalists, So there's a sax player who plays a bit of guitar and then percussion, they've got these singers. It's just stunning how
Oh,
good it is. It sounds like the record, but it's
they're
live.
yeah, they're amazing. I've seen that band about 3 or 4 times. I see they did this premiere in London before called That Lucky Old Son, which is actually a really good Brian Wilson record. Like Van Dyke worked on him. I think it
Oh,
was
yeah.
2012. Like it's a brilliant later record. And he got commissioned by the Royal Festival Hall to do like a piece. So he did this whole album called That Lucky Old Son. And dude, the whole band just were like you were saying, just incredible. Like the
Yeah.
vibraphones there and the sax and
Yeah.
everything, even at that Tannerin, like the theremin sound and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's remarkable. I mean, I say it's one of the highlights of all the Glastonbury stuff was that. And the other thing that is brilliant is the last Tina Turner show she did when she toured when she was 70. So it's about,
I seen that at Christmas on TV. They had a
yeah,
Tina
it's
Turner
brilliant.
concert. Oh my God, man, she's incredible.
And what a band. I
Yeah,
mean, again, great band, great singers, great dancers.
yeah,
And she doesn't stop. It's like a 2 or 3 hour show. She's nearly 70 at the time. It was
yeah.
the year she was 70. And she's phenomenal. I mean, that again is a real high point because I just love that kind of real energy and great musicianship. And
Yeah.
it's on both of those, the Glastonbury thing with the Beach Boys and Tina Turner. They're two of my highlights, I must admit. Of watching. And I saw the Tina Turner because my son he's a truck driver and he was touring with her. So we went and saw her at the
Oh,
O2.
wow.
And
That's
it was
class.
just, I mean, it was just remarkable. The energy, the sound of, the sound, because the O2 isn't brilliant for sound really, but the
Yeah.
sound was fantastic.
Right.
And she was just remarkable to keep that kind of energy up. for
Wow.
2 or 3 hours with the dancing, and it just never stopped. And then she comes out on that crane, and she's kind of running backwards and forwards on this tiny little thing in stilettos. You just think you are mad.
That's that concert. I don't know, was it the one from the O2, but it might have been Germany. It was somewhere, but it was on at Christmas, and I remember watching it. I was like, holy shit, man! And it went on forever. I was like, how
Yeah,
long is this concert? And she went up
just
on the crane and everything. I was like,
yeah,
she must have been about 10 encores, but it was crazy, man.
one hit after another, and those
Yeah,
fantastic dancers and the singers. I mean, and that because she dances in a kind of fairly strange way. I always thought Tina said, but the three young girls who are with her, they've all got the same moves. So they're on stage, kind of all doing this rather strange kind of dancing thing, especially with her legs.
yeah.
It's just remarkable that you can have that kind of energy. She only did every other night, I think, on that tour.
Ah.
So it was a big stage set anyway, but that she wasn't doing 5, 6 nights in a row. She'd do a night, day off, a night, day off, and it ran for a few months.
But at that
So
age,
fairway to
that's incredible. Like at that age to be doing that, like
yeah,
she's probably fitter than me.
fantastic.
Well, I probably should let you go, Phil, because
Yeah,
I know,
yeah,
I know,
that's
I
cool.
know.
Well, send us a link when you've edited stuff together. That would
I
be
will,
great.
man. And I meant to tell you, I really enjoyed listening to the AV one. I hadn't listened to it. I remember I listened to it years ago, and
Yeah,
I hadn't listened to it. And I was like, oh, I was kind of, I said I put it on when I was in bed, so I was kind of chilling to it, and it's nice. It's like got that kind of vibe. And then
yeah, yeah.
I watched the visuals to it then today or yesterday, and it really works well with the little video clips that were there.
Right. Yeah,
Really
yeah.
cool,
Those
man.
little teasers that they've made up. But yeah, the I like part two, which has the drum thing on it. It's just a great
Yeah,
guitar part. I love
yeah,
this kind of chunk guitar thing with this end thing that's kind of sounds almost like a sax there as well or something. But no, it was kind of it was fun to do, and the visuals I think fit really well, with it, and it definitely gives the flavour of what it was like at the time.
yeah.
Um, so who knows? But I mean, it's nice to just have it out there in a way after it being kind of kidnapped for 25 years. It just feels nice that it's out there.
When was the actually? When was the last time you listened to it before? Because obviously you have to listen to it before you're putting it
I
out.
did listen to it. I got a request, I guess, about 3 years ago. Somebody on one of the TalkTalk sites, I think, just said, "Hey, whatever happened to the AV1? Where can I get it from?"
Yeah,
And I actually did reply. I said, "Look, I can send you some files if you want. I can send you a wee transfer, so you get to hear it." And then that's when I actually put it on and kind of listened to it after years of not listening to it in a way.
yeah,
And actually went, "Oh wow, yeah, this is good." And that's I remember that bit. I love part two. I must admit, there's something about that I just really like. And the first part, that's the kind of 19-minute part, is very trance. I mean, you can quite easily just drift off to that because of
yeah, yeah,
the Tibetan bells and the brushed piano and all. It's just floaty. So it probably was about 3 years ago, which was when the first time that I got it out for years and years and years, because I didn't even think I had a copy of it. It's one of those, when you work on things, you just
yeah.
don't have a copy of your own thing. But I did find one copy that I had. Um, and I listened to it a couple of times last year as well. Strangely, especially as where we are now, but I'd got it out and was playing it, and then say Bada Bing got in touch, and I don't know if anything's going to happen with that now. Whether he's still keen to put it out as a vinyl, we'll have to wait and see. And who knows what'll happen with the piano track, but that's
Yeah.
I know it's Mark Hollis, but it is just it was a 7-minute piece that we doubled up to, because it ran as a loop, so it just ran forever. But we put it on twice with Mark.
Ah,
We
okay,
had
yeah,
7 minutes, which we copied. And he says in this interview that it's funny because he did this interview at the time of it was an interview that was around the time he did his solo album, but I don't think he'd finished the solo album. And when the guy said, "So what are you up to at the moment?" he actually said, "Well, I've been messing around with a kind of piano piece for this installation." It's like, yeah,
yeah.
that's us. and he wanted to move into that area. He wanted to he was getting heavily into kind of visuals with music, but
Oh,
then it all kind of fizzled out and stopped. I mean, I believe he's still sat at home playing, but as he says in the interview, it's more for his own pleasure than putting anything down to release. He's had a couple of things out. He did work on a film which it never got used, um,
yeah, there was a lot of
but
those
it was
things
kind
that
of
he
nice.
worked on and nothing got
Sorry,
used. There was a lot of those things he kind of, there was a lot of things he kind of
yeah,
worked on and never got used. It was like for that I think it was Mary Antoinette. I think it
right,
was that movie. It was in that
sounds
book,
good.
The Perfect Silence book.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of peculiar. Like kind of all these things just kind of fell apart from me. You're like, oh, dude, come
I
on.
know it's really hard to know though whether was Mark's decision or whether it's just things petered out or whether the film things decided actually we want something different.
Yeah,
There's so many variables when you get involved with like film. But I always believed that Mark would be sitting at home with his beautiful collection of guitars or his piano and doing stuff. I never saw him as somebody who just kind of, although he put the music business aside, I never thought he'd just put music aside. Music was a huge part of his life. That's really what, sparked him in so many ways. So I can see him still being at home doing stuff,
yeah.
but just not bothered about putting it out or being commercial or he certainly didn't want to deal with the music business,
Jeez, yeah, I can imagine.
which probably started pretty much at the time of Laughing Stock, because when he signed the deal for Laughing Stock, he signed for 2 records. So Laughing Stock, and then 7 years later the solo album, but they were signed together for Polydor, and
Oh,
that whole experience we went through with Lucian Grange and Polydor, that finished it for him. So he
right.
did manage to make the solo album, but we had no interference from any. We literally were allowed from not on the Colour of Spring, but from Spirit of Eden, Laughing Stock, his solo album. We would make the records, and he would deliver the record, and then all hell would let loose. But he never gave any demos or let anyone in to hear anything that wasn't finished. It was always he was in that position to where he could do something and then deliver it. When we
Yeah,
delivered Laughing Stock, it was sat on for a year before it even came out.
mad, isn't it?
Yeah,
Crazy.
because
With
the
with
rec company hated it.
the AV1, could you like if you're doing installations, could you send you because it's kind of easier to like we're saying here to do with like triggers and stuff like that. Could you like send the music to other places in the world where you actually been there, like installation wise?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, in fact, Dave's got this idea where it could just be we could send the visuals and the music and let people do their own
Yeah,
installations. That's very much the way Dave's thinking at the moment because most of it can now be projected. So it's up to whoever's whether it's a gallery or a church or something. Let them put up their own installation. So they're part of the whole process. So yeah, we could send it anywhere in theory. Just
ah,
need to find the right kind of location or the right offer where somebody wants to do it.
that'd
But
be
we've
cool, man.
got this one possible down in Moncton Wild in a church, which I think would work really well. And I think Dave and I like the idea of it in certain galleries if you've got the right kind of gallery because it is a kind of art thing. So if it could be in the right kind of gallery, then you could just float around walls and
Oh yeah, that'd be
that kind of
class.
thing.
I was somewhere before and someone done an installation. It was in a forest, but they had little speakers up. And everywhere you
Okay,
kind of walked around the forest, you could kind of hear
fantastic.
it's class, man.
I'd
And I was
love
I
that.
was thinking about that today with that. I was like,
Yeah.
that'd be class, man, if you could kind of do something like that.
Yeah, because we had lots of speakers when we were doing it originally, because we did this warehouse or factory, whatever it was, but we also did one under, I don't know if it was Newcastle, but we did it underneath the station. It was like catacombs.
Oh
It was
wow.
just bizarre. It was like being in these caves and things. And that's where we had the piano thing, because we had this a kind of deconstructed piano, which is one of the which was one of our more stationary installations, if you like, which is where the piano piece was from. But in there, we had these speakers that were scattered through this whole thing and with these delays and things. So if you're in there for, say, an hour and a half, 2 hours, just wandering around, the whole thing would just start to,
Repeating on itself.
repeat and also fall on itself. It was excellent fun.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that'd
good
be
to see
class.
you, mate.
Yeah, you man.
You take care.
Always, yeah. Thanks very much for doing this, brother. I'll
Not
link
at
you
all.
up. Cheers, my
Send me a
man.
link.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.